Chris, excited to have you on. We worked together in the past. When you were at Asana, you were there for several years. Clearly knew what you were doing. You're behind the scenes kind of operator, but figured if there's someone to ask about international SEO, you're the guy. So I thought bring you on and chat your expertise there. So welcome to the program.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks, Ross.
The reason I wanted to bring you on is Asana, for anyone who checks Hrefs, is like obviously really scaled organic traffic generally, but a lot of that success is your international program. You went, and I don't want to speak for you, but I think you told me something in the aim of the direction of 0 to 20 million international visits, and of course that leading to actually qualified traffic, not just visits. It was something you were behind and kind of headed the program for. I'd love to first start there. Like you're no longer at Asana, but I would love to just hear about what you accomplished at a high level, and I think that would help set the stage for our combo.
Yeah. I'll do a quick summary, and then we can deep dive in anything that sounds interesting. So yeah, I was at Asana 5 years, head of organic growth, founding SEO hire there. Really built out traditional kind of SEO, content marketing, and technical program first couple of years, but hit the sweet spot with international and really saw that fantastic growth and scale where, to your point, we saw 7x growth in traffic over the number of years and over 20 million visits across international SEO with that really holistic kind of strategic approach, using SEO as that growth engine to drive impact and outcomes. So happy to dive in. There's so much to talk about with international, where so underutilized, so under leveraged, but it's just a real game changer if you know what you're doing.
I'm curious how that original program came out of 0 to 1. Was it like an executive thing? Did you bring it to them? Like how does that origin story occur?
Yeah. This is typical of a lot of hyper growth companies, like Asana at the time a few years ago. It's all about trying to show growth. Back then, it was growth at all cost, zero interest rate period. So they really wanted to go global. They really wanted to expand. And again, they were primarily English US market, but they saw the opportunity there. And so they really wanted to invest, but strategically. So it wasn't like we were all in on international and let's just go 0 to 100. It's much more like growth mindset, treating it as a new channel, right? You had to unlock incentivized growth. So, pilot and scale. And we aligned really closely to the business. So I think that was the biggest key, right? So you don't want to boil the ocean. So we said, all right, what are those priority markets? We really looked at how would we invest to succeed, to drive outcomes, because that was the goal, right? I was on the growth marketing team. We were all about driving trial signups, lead conversions, form fills, but all about driving the business and continuing the business growth over the course of like 18-month to 24-month period, kind of setting those foundations, right? Planting the seeds for future growth. And so international was just a great opportunity and lever that we identified, and then really started to, again, pilot and scale, starting with one market, kind of testing and learning, using data. Kind of unique when it comes to international. Coincidentally, it's not like top of the list for a lot of localization teams when maybe that's a missed opportunity. So we really applied kind of traditional growth marketing processes and framework, but to international. And that was where we just started to unlock that stat sig kind of A/B testing, confirmation growth that we got from our data teams, and then showcased that and scaled it with leadership help and funding and resourcing. Happy to talk more about that because there's a lot to unpack.
Out of curiosity, was that your personal first like international SEO endeavor?
Not the first, but it was definitely the most extensive, right? So before Asana, I led the SEO team at Macy's.com for a few years. But Macy's primarily English US market, so we didn't really scale globally to that extent. Prior to that, again, just going deeper into my background, I don't want to go too name drop, but I was working for the Gap Inc. brands and driving SEO there, and that was where it was much more internationally focused, and they had regional sites, UCTLDs, and all sorts of kind of like traditional international SEO hreflang mapping for Canada, UK, EMEA, everywhere that the Gap Inc. brands operate, but much different type of industry and vertical, B2C versus B2B, retail, consumer product versus tech SaaS. So it's similar principles, but completely different frameworks and decision-making in terms of tactics.
Going back to the Asana example of going from 0 to 1 for companies that are just thinking about this endeavor, like how, if you were doing that again or with a new ambiguous AI SaaS company, of course, is probably who's going to ask you today. Like, how would you start thinking about that process? Like, what would your operations be?
I think strategy before scale. I think that's the headline, right? It's easy to jump into international and say, all right, let me pull some search demand volume. Let me do some keyword, question topical research, spit out some content and start to rank. And it's like, great, this is working, but inefficient. Right? I think it's all about outcomes. What are you actually trying to achieve? And resetting the strategy and the approach and the objectives. And to me, it's all about your alignment to your business. What is the type of outcome that the business is looking to achieve, right? Are they trying to drive pipe? Are they trying to drive reach and awareness in a new market? Are they trying to drive, specific conversions from a laser-focused specific market and audience? All those types of things are critical, right? You have to understand that. And then you have to understand your audience and the market. And do you have any type of unique competitive advantage or differentiator to enter that market? Are you brand aware? Is the problem or solution aware to that audience? Like, you have to kind of start early, almost as you would when you're entering in any type of new channel. And you have to really align it to the business, right? Like, we drove a bunch of traffic and conversions from UK, but like maybe there's not a UK sales team to support that. And so maybe the value of those leads or like the LTV on a cohorted market basis is like 10x lower than if you were to drive a lead in another market. And so I think you have to have that laser focus and the alignment that ladders into those business objectives and outcomes, right? Not like rocket science by any means. I think that's like a very common thing to say in starting practice, but you have to start there. And I think that's the most common misstep, right? And then you have to look at resourcing and funding. International is always a priority for companies, but it's typically not the most funded, or it's like shared partial support. You ask any localization team, they're always talking about budget constraints. So it's about leverage and prioritization, and that understanding of the business acumen is really what is critical for that type of decision making to align the SEO side of the house, right? So then that's one, that's the foundation. And then two is, I think, the operating model. So again, are you centralized? Are you distributed? What does it look like for like regional teams or like folks in seat in market there to help? Or is this all centralized under like an HQ? How are you operationalizing the content, the translations, the experiences that you're crafting that need to be localized and regionalized? All like very, very critical inputs to look at program ROI, program efficiency, but also realistic expectations in terms of what you can do and what you're trying to achieve, right? So I think it's just business rigor and a little bit more accuracy in about how you decide the strategic framework and guardrails that you're trying to achieve. And then you apply those SEO best practices and principles as the kind of engine to drive you there, right? To take you from like current state to that future ideal state. So that's kind of high level. But yeah, I think like diving into the details there, right? An example would be, we had a localization team. They were already translating content at scale across a number of different markets, mostly focused on content parity, experience parity. Hey, we support this market. We need this page. All right, well, here it is. But it wasn't necessarily enough to stand out or win. And again, we're trying to operationalize this content to rank across Google, to show up in like organic social, to be used in, like onboarding emails. It had to actually speak to that customer. It had to resonate, and it couldn't just be one-to-one kind of Google Translate level translation quality. And so that was where we really started to test around what would it take to win in this market? What would it take to move the needle for conversion rate or impact? And then we just applied experimentation and tested a bunch of different variants around, hey, what if we did translation? What if we did human translation? What if we did native copy? What if we did machine translation with a human going back and then paraphrasing? And we just applied all of those through different testing. And then we landed on, what was the best ROI for what we had and what was the outcome we were trying to achieve. And lo and behold, like we created a nice little framework and tiering model that we could apply across all our priority markets that kind of maximized our budget and still was able to drive high quality content and really the outcomes that I was talking about earlier, just like fantastic growth, low barrier to entry, and like high impact, high intent traffic.
For a new program, would you recommend normally, like, do you need the sales and operations infrastructure there before SEO starts? Is there like a typical timeline where you need that in place 6-12 months before that engages, or vice versa? Maybe you don't need it. You need start SEO 6 months before that engages. What's common there? What are your recommendations?
It's hard, right? I think like you don't have that like magic 8 ball in terms of what your company is going to decide in terms of international tiering. But yeah, it's always earlier is better, right? That's not rocket science. But that was what we would typically do. We'd had like a tiered model for tier 1 markets, tier 3, tier 4, all the way down to tier 5. Tier 1 would be aligned by our business. Tier 2 might be aligned by our revenue strat operation. Like these are high TAM, high potential markets. And tier 3 would be owned by the growth team. And like that's where we saw opportunity, we saw demand, and we had tactics that we could kind of kickstart the engine and that flywheel in those markets. And that's what we would typically do. Again, SEO is great because it's cost effective, right? It's high ROI, especially if you're just already investing for a particular market, and then all you have to do for incremental growth is translate and localize. So that's what we did. We applied our English strategy across international markets, and so it was very affordable, very cost effective. But yeah, it kickstarted all that demand, that problem unaware, solution unaware traffic engagement. And then later on, 6 months, 12 months down the road, once there's rev support in seat, but also when we start to invest in more bottom funnel and paid. And so that's when the kind of flywheel connected and closed, and all of a sudden really started to kickstart that performance.
One thing you noted that I'd love to hear your opinion on, I mean, there's so many options in terms of just like straight translation, machine translated, native copy, as you noted. I'm sure there isn't a one size fits all opinion there, but I know there's just a general, from your experience, let's say it is SaaS, a waterfall of where you should do certain things in certain places and where the other things, like obviously more detailed articles to the thinnest AI generated stuff make sense. Like, would love to hear you talk through that.
Yeah. This is really important. If you ask any localization person, they would talk your ear off about this. This is a huge untapped opportunity for businesses to understand and leverage, right? But essentially, there's maybe 5 to 6 different levels of linguistic fluency and quality when it comes to translations, right? Like machine translation at the very bottom, very cheap, but very obviously quality averse. And then you all the way up to like native copywriting with a human in market, in region, creating it as if it's regionally exclusive content, not even based on like an English source, right? Very expensive, but very high quality. And then there's all these levels in between: machine translation with a human editor, or maybe, a human translation that is transcreating and paraphrasing. I think they all have a place. And you just need to understand your user journey and how is that mapped to the experiences and surfaces across the ones that you have for your company, right? And so I always say, like, try and work bottoms up. and try and reverse the conversion funnel and focus the highest quality first, right? So it's like your sign up flow, your CTAs, your homepage messaging, your ad copy, all of those. I mean, obviously, as close to conversion as possible. So they should require the highest level of quality and nuance, right? So human, 100% across the board, if at all possible. Ideally native written without being translated from a source, because there's always something lost in translation. And then as you like go up and you move up away from that conversion point, you're moving further away, like to middle funnel, top of funnel, discovery content. I think that's when it's okay to get a little further away from that like human touch. But it all depends on the objective and the channel, right? So still, if you're optimizing a top of funnel awareness article for Google purposes and ranking for SEO, there's higher levels of quality that are still needed. Like you have to adapt, right? But if it's like support content, help center, step-by-step tutorial content, machine translation and lower levels or mid levels of quality work fantastic, especially at scale, right? If you have 10 languages, 30 languages, there's just a resource constraint, a budget issue that always pops up, and you're going to have to make those types of decisions. And so that's what I mean. You test, use data. Understand all the different combinations and figure out the cost, and then test and figure out the impact and land on what works for that particular market, and then create like a playbook or a tiering model. And I think that's something that's really untapped, where our localization team was great, but they, for some reason, didn't have access to a lot of our data and analytics. They didn't have like a dashboard that showed web performance, traffic conversion, conversion rate by market, by language, by cohort. So they were flying blind a little bit. And I think that's where, again, as a growth team, we are very, very all in and immersed with that type of data. And so that was where it's like our powers combined can do great things. And so we ended up creating little tiger teams and pods that we could start to share and join that expertise to unlock those new opportunities. So again, they're the experts when it comes to, in my mind, like fluency and translation quality and how you should apply that and organizing that across all the different services. But they're not necessarily like business analysts or growth marketers that can understand business and strategy and kind of pragmatic optimization for impact. And so that's where I think you need to join forces. Better yet, too, if you can pull in someone from like brand or product marketing. And then that's where you can really align on those tiering, those levels of quality. But again, I always think in outcomes. So I think it's shared, right? But yeah, you definitely have to test your way into it and figure out what works. Yeah, a good example, I think, just to throw it out there is, we would have Germany as a tier 1 market. We'd have Japan as a tier 1 market. And we'd apply a lot of different specific localizations for Japan because you have to for that market and for that language to succeed and win. But in German, we'd apply similar levels and we wouldn't see the same level of return. And it's just Germany is such a higher English proficiency in that market. We saw diminishing returns. And we didn't necessarily need to go as deep or as far with our content as we did with like a Japanese or a French market. But even though it was the same priority internally to the business, we could find a little bit more efficiencies and kind of cut costs and then apply it elsewhere where we'd see bigger return.
Are there, that you caught the question I was just about to ask, are there more, market specific? Maybe if you focus on the big markets for most companies, are there other market specific considerations that came up like that for how deep is worth going you could share?
Yeah. I think the secret when it comes to international SEO, just like international expansion in general, is market intelligence. You have to have some sort of regional UXR, regional audience research. A lot of the companies that I've worked with in the past had departments or divisions internally that would create those types of insights. Unfortunately, they were like 98% English and US focused, right? Or maybe it would be like English as in UK. But once we went to EMEA or APAC markets, there was just a big gap when it came to really understanding the audience and how like a corporate narrative translated into that market would resonate, or how are different is the ICP and the jobs to be done and the pain points in like a market that's in APAC versus a market that's in EMEA versus in LATAM. And I think that's where you have to have that nuance and that fine tuning to really drive a successful program. Otherwise, you're just making these blind assumptions. You come across sounding like this like very bespoke US company that's trying to like force feed this content or this experience to a native audience that it just doesn't work. So I think that's like one of the biggest gaps. So at Asana, I was lucky to work with an international SEO who had a passion and a hobby around UXR. And so we actually created an international UXR program in partnership with our UX internal team, but using like DIY kits that they would provide those guardrails and the structure. And then we would then drive the execution. And that was where we would interview internal stakeholders. We do like a small user testing in market with those native audience that we were trying to reach, and take that feedback, turn it into insights, and then we'd apply that to our SEO strategy, our content marketing strategy, and our just even the overall web experience and kind of our conversion optimization path and user mapping. So that is huge. But I feel like it's an unspoken tactic that no one really talks about, because maybe it's not necessarily something that typically falls under like an SEO umbrella. But I think, like, again, if you're thinking of content and SEO creation, you typically start with like understanding the audience and working with your product marketing teams or doing some sort of research around the topic. But for some reason, when it goes to international, we're just going to apply what we already did and we're just going to focus on translations. I think it's a big miss.
So at the scale you're doing, I'm guessing a TMS or translation management system, for those who are unaware, was helpful. I could be wrong, but for people new to this, thinking about international SEO, like what scale from volume or languages does that become something that's needed, if ever?
Yeah. This is a tricky one because there's no one size rule in my mind. So, TMS is a translation management system. Think of your content management system, like your WordPress or, Drupal or Contentful. Similar question. When do you onboard a CMS for your company? And, it's a kind of multifaceted answer, right? So I think in general, it's once you get past maybe 2 to 3 languages that you're supporting across the site, that's when it starts to get pretty complicated with like back-end workflows and how you manage across your front-end inventory. But also just the size and scale of your content inventory. I think once you get past like 50 pages, 100 pages of your website, it's critical. Like, right, you're working with this system that all of a sudden can shepherd and automate so much more of what you need to do across all the kind of nuanced changes, right? So it's great for operationalizing with speed, with QA, with sort of programmatic updates and alignment. So you can, say, hey, like we're going to change this one page, and it auto updates across the 10 other regionalized versions automatically. Sometimes you don't even have to retranslate because they use a system that's called like a translation memory. So if we've already translated a word, it'll just bank it in the system, and then it'll save you cost and time down the road too. So critical and really, really fantastic. Especially when it comes to things like support, help center content, all those types of things that are very, very programmatic and very similar. That's where I think it's fantastic. And you really need to start to think about using a TMS to organize it, unless you have the manual resources, which typically you don't have. But there's some downsides to a lot of the TMSs and how they're implemented too, right? They don't manage quality. You have to figure out LQA and process efficiencies, or kind of leverage the capabilities that they have. And sometimes they're not great and they're a little rigid. And sometimes there's a lot of like translation debt that comes into it, where if you have to retranslate a word that's not in the translation memory, it gets really expensive, because sometimes you can't just translate one word. You have to translate the entire page just to update like 1 or 2 word phrases that might change. So major downside there, because again, like if you're doing a product launch and you call it one thing, and then 3 months later, you're like, hey, we've kind of revised this. Now we're going to call it name number 2. You might have to update 200 pages across your site, and all of a sudden there's like a $5,000 ad hoc bill waiting for you. And you're like, I'm changing literally like 60 words total. Like, this is crazy. So you really need to understand these things and kind of figure out what's the right fit for, what you're looking to achieve.
How does pricing work generally on those? Is pretty expensive, or like how would you describe that at a high level?
I think again, talk to your localization friends on this, because I'm not the expert in terms of all the details here, but usually it's by the word, right? So it's based on your translation quality. What is it? Machine translation all the way up to like that native copy, and it could be a couple cents for like a machine translated word, all the way to I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 cents for native copy. As you scale your content, each article can be 1,000 to 2,000 words. So it can get really pricey really quick, especially if you're talking about not just new content creation, but maintenance. Again, like as you're scaling, and you kind of need to refresh and reoptimize, every few months or so. And so that's where, again, budget and resourcing is like number one when it comes to localization and international SEO, especially in terms of what you're trying to achieve for your outcomes.
That makes me think of another question. Like, if someone has a couple additional markets, like, what do you think a minimum viable budget is to do this well? Is there like what you can't just do like 2 articles in Spanish, can you? Or what are your opinions on that?
Yeah, exactly. So again, like going back, strategy before scale, right? Before just jumping in and saying, hey, we're going to dabble and do like 2 articles here. And magic, like Field of Dreams, everyone is just going to come running with their money to buy your product. Like, not realistic if you're doing that across kind of any campaign in my mind, right? You have to compete to win. And like typically with SEO, they always say like, hey, like look at the number one result, and like maybe you have to create something 10x better to not just compete and catch up, but actually overtake and win. Apply the same thinking to international. How are you going to catch up and beat your competitor who might be like a year or 2 ahead of you with in-market resources, and you're just kind of dabbling and putting one toe in the water? Like, it just doesn't make sense. So that's where I think maybe you don't have to do that and boil the ocean, but what are those priority markets, and go narrow and focused, and then start to go all in, right? And again, like with SEO, it's great. You're optimizing, you can drive all sorts of insights and performance, but typically it's not the highest converting channel. So a lot of what we would do too is we would apply the same level of optimization that we would for our SEO strategy. We'd apply it to like a bottom funnel page, apply it to like a use case or solution page, or maybe on some messaging on your homepage or ad copy, CTA copy, and then run an experiment and start to get some stat sig data on a page that has a lot higher volume. And then you can start to extrapolate impact and say, all right, I'm going to build this forecast. If I apply this across now all the rest of these pages, maybe my growth could drive this much in terms of impact. And you can start to sell that internally, build a business case, right? Treat it as you would any other mature channel, and on the same kind of pedestal as like paid. If you want to keep getting investment, you have to prove it out, drive the impact and results the company is looking for.
So, I mean, this is such a big endeavor, hypothetically. Like, you've done this several times. What are either mistakes you've made or common mistakes you see that you've learned from or seen that you'd call out that people should avoid?
I think there's a lot. There's a lot that come to mind. I'll try and narrow it down, but I think number one is budget. Like, staying on top of your budget management as close as possible and as accurate as possible. Like I said, these TMSs, a lot of them don't record translation requests. They send you an invoice at the end of the month based off word count, and not necessarily like the last time the page was updated or the total number of pages that you've translated. And so a lot of times that can get lost in the shuffle. And then all of a sudden you're looking at this website that has various levels of, translation. You're not exactly sure when it was last translated. When do you need to update and spend more money? How do you maintain it all? And so you have to track that manually, or you have to create an internal system that can stay in a little bit more proactive on that, or you're just going to be spiraling in budget and tech debt, content debt for infinity, because you'll never be able to create incremental. You're always going to be in maintenance mode, because there's always changes, product launches, requests from regional teams to update XYZ. And like I said, international is huge undertapped opportunity, but you got to fight tooth and nail to get investment and budget in 2025. And if you can't show that return, you might lose it out to a campaign or a paid team that can. And then all of a sudden you don't have that budget next year and you're strapped even more. So I think proactive budget management is number one with a bullet, proving out the impact of that work and showing the ROI like any kind of growth team would, but through the international lens. Huge. Number two, I would say operations. Typically, you work with a localization program manager, maybe not. Maybe if you're using an external agency, they might have a project manager. Outside of that, it's really, really hard to gain any type of operations support or marketing operations support for international, at least at the companies that I've worked at. But yet you're dealing with 10, 20, markets and languages you're optimizing for. One piece of content could be 20. You're producing 20 articles a month. Now all of a sudden the scale is just bonkers. And you're taking this resource that you want to focus on optimization and measurement and, continuing the growth. But now they're forced to dedicate this enormous amount of time on operations and project management, which is not necessarily how you want to spend that resource most effectively. And so how do you get ahead of operations? Like I said, to take care of budget management, people, translation, networks, contractors, internal processes, XYZ. It's a lot. And yeah, the third I would say is data. And so, like I said, having data and telemetry for some reason is not a common requirement across the board for international. There's just sometimes gaps in what they can see and how they can measure to make decisions. But better yet, speaking the language of the business. So you're not just looking at data that shows, oh, this page drove a bunch of traffic, but you're like, all right, here's the ROI or the conversion or the pipe gen that this market, that this language drove. Being able to look at that by cohort, so you can compare language versus language or market versus market, or better yet, international content in this market versus maybe a paid campaign in that market. And you can start to go to a leader and say, we're a little bit higher ROI. So if there's that extra funding, send it over here as opposed to over there. We're gonna help the greater good, but it also helps resource and fund your team for the future. And again, international gets pulled in a million directions. So budget and effectiveness is always priority number one. And you got to anchor in data, right? You got to speak the language of business. You got to speak the language of your leaders to continue to get priority.
You hinted on this with the operations comment there, but curious if you had an ideal team structure for another SaaS company that has the potential to be global. What is that team? What do you think that looks like? If it's possible to paint that.
It changes over time. I think it's tricky, right? Again, you want to anchor in your objectives and outcomes, but I think typically when you fully mature, it tends to mature into something that's, some sort of centralized governance or strategy in place with regional flexibility, right? So maybe there's a head of SEO driving overall strategy. Things like technical SEO can be a little bit more global in nature and apply across market, across languages, how you set up your CCTLDs or your workflows in the back end or, XYZ technical. But you need that regional flexibility and that nuance to say, all right, for Japan, we're going to do this differently because the market and the audience adaptation needs it, versus maybe for these other markets, we're going to do something else. And you need to have that level of flexibility and nuance to either partner with people or to have someone in seat who can just run the show themselves in order to make a lot of those decisions. But again, it has to be all connected and nuanced, right? So not operating in a silo, but integrated with the rest of the org and what the business is trying to achieve. And you have all these other potential partners in that specific market or region that are, curious about what you're doing and why are you doing that versus 3 or 4 other opportunities. And they want alignment, right? They want to understand the impact so that they can support, but it can also help scratch their back and hit their kind of bottom line or whatever their kind of success is measured on. And having that, not just planning alignment, but that shared outcomes, that's huge. So again, the name of the game is you want to build momentum and snowball with international. You don't just want to kind of ride it out and then all of a sudden you have to do more with less over time. That's just how it starts to spiral, right? So you want to grow, and international is all about growth.
There must be significant communication challenges that come with working with these teams internationally. Are there any like core lessons or things you found to be more effective there that might be non-obvious, or is it kind of the normal stuff?
Yeah, it's normal stuff. I think you just need to be flexible because there's always like time zone changes and differences that make things a little tricky. And so lots of early mornings and late nights. And so you have to like find a human touch to it. You have to like somehow connect beyond business and just build a relationship and build that trust and influence. And that it's kind of basic common knowledge for any kind of successful or healthy kind of working relationship. But yeah, getting that human alignment and touch and personal kind of, side of the house, but then I'll again, shared outcomes and shared success. That then you're just building that momentum internally. They're going to champion for you. You're going to talk them up. It's just going to be great. And then Slack. However the communication preferences work at Asana, we actually had a perfect platform and product that is built to do that and to really help.
Yeah.
So using something like Asana is always fantastic too. There's a little plug.
Yeah, there's a challenge with international, I imagine, of like balancing work-life balance, honestly, of like that need to have calls early, late, and also the Slack is the probably best channel, but you feel like you need to be on at all times to respond quickly in those people's time zones. Is that fair to say? I mean, I guess if the company just practices it all the time, you hopefully find a way around that, but it maybe just be the cost of doing business if you're going to win.
100%.
Yeah.
But I think it's just normal. Like when you talk with folks that are in your international market colleagues, I think like this is something that's like an American view that I think is just second nature to them. Like we have meetings with folks in Dublin or folks in Tokyo. It might be 7:00, 8 p.m. their time. And that's just normal. Like that's just part of the job for them too, working for an American company. And so you just take solace in that and you're like, all right, well, I'll do the early morning so you don't have to do, XYZ, and there's trade-offs and you're just building that relationship. But yeah, I think it's just, you can't get out hustled. So you're always going to want to try and put forth the best effort you can because, who wants to be out hustled? And if it just means like waking up a little early or staying on a little late, but you're going to drive the performance and you're going to help win for the company or for your program, then I mean, that's why you get paid to do the job, right?
Yeah, makes sense. I mean, it's an interesting maybe just hiring consideration. Like you got to have that hustle mentality. Like it might not be the best thing for someone who has 4 kids and is like that's challenging. And but that maybe is a consideration for who you bring on to do that. But Chris, you clearly had that hustle, it sounds like. So
good team.
I had a good team. Yeah. So I mean, obviously things are so rapidly changing. AI, got to say a buzzword in here. We said machine translated a few times, but how would you do things differently at all with where we are now? How are you future proofing? What are you thinking about that would evolve this if you did it again?
Yeah. It's great because there's so much potential there. My first instinct jumps to the internal side of the house for international, right? Like I'm not thinking translations and using AI for that. Although like there's definitely some workflows that are interesting on that front, but I think in my mind, a lot of it is like, again, that strategic alignment for your business, for the audience, for your positioning, for all sorts of things that you typically would target with like your product marketing team or your regional and field marketing team to understand that audience or the market. Those insights around like that regional DIY user research, or better yet, if you can get from a formal source, instead of always relying on that to do that manually or working with like human partners to try and do those tasks or provide those insights. Better yet, like take all that documentation, interview those folks, get them to provide those insights and create an internal like AI agent or an LLM that can be your international product expert or your international audience expert. And you can use them for research and insights that you can pull into your strategy, your content. Your content creators can use that if they're like actually writing and they have a question, instead of reaching out to someone where it's the middle of the night over an APAC, they can just like ping the AI, or the LLM, and then generate the result. And it's like literally straight from product documentation or the source that has already uploaded it, and it's available 24/7. That type of thing I think is next level. Really all about automating that and then spreading that across as many surfaces and teams as possible. That was something big that Asana started to leverage, not on the international side when I was there, but more about the product and the brand, and just becoming that like product expert, that product marketing positioning expert about how you can integrate and weave those insights across all like our marketing campaign strategy. So applying similar level, but on the international side, just seems like a no-brainer. Again, efficiency and tactical accelerant, like just game changer. And another big thing I think AI could be great at is QA, right? A big thing with translations is if you don't speak the language, how can you understand the quality of this? And you're typically asking someone who is fluent, to kind of read through, provide some QA. Better yet, Google has indexed thousands of books. I think they're getting much better at that. There's like all sorts of vendors who are great at this, from like Grammarly to others. And a lot of these TMSs have built their own APIs and kind of AI systems that look at localization, quality, translation, fluency, and applying that, but with AI. So then all of a sudden you can just do that at scale. You can assess the quality of your site. You can assess market by market, and then I'll make all sorts of impacts and updates that could just be, again, part of an automated process or workflow that you're building with your web team, or like using like Air Ops. Again, like build an international workflow instead of content cannibalization. Build it around like international SEO and like fluency gaps or content coverage gaps or improvements around anything that would be impactful. So I think all of those, and then obviously like, natural language processing, all the things that are typical kind of AI improvements for the English side that we're a little bit more familiar with. Some of them have some international support, but a lot of them don't necessarily have it across all the markets. So I'm curious to see how that kind of changes and evolves over time, especially in the next few months or years.
There's a lot of talk about our top funnel getting eradicated by AI. How is that? How do you think about that internationally? Is that risk as high? We think about machine translated top funnel more often based on your guidance. I'm sure it's market by market, but any kind of broad swaths about how you like, is that not long for this world, or how would you think about the top funnel with that kind of cannibalization happening?
Yeah. I don't have the stats in front of me. I know, what is it, like AI overviews and AI mode, I think is rolled out globally now. But for a long time, it wasn't. And because of EMEA has much stricter privacy laws like GDPR, there's a lot of like limitations that Google couldn't necessarily do. I think they're trying to figure out that and change that to kind of bring it up to speed with the US. So I don't know if this is like a long competitive advantage, but that was definitely something we reaped the benefits of, because we didn't really see big impact across EMEA for a long time. So now I think that's big, but still, I think you still want to build that topical authority. So when I think of like top of funnel, to me, like what is informational content not necessarily going to work anymore, and not necessarily something I'd recommend, but anything related to your ICP, your jobs to be done, those pain points, and building the topical authority that really is needed for both SEO and GEO. It's like, it's always recommended, right? Maybe you don't have to do at the same scale and volume. Like maybe it's not about volume anymore, but you need to at least check the box. You need to show Google that you're this authoritative, trusted resource, and you have to back it up with earned and owned media all the same. So again, some things like you just have to do, and you can't measure them like direct response, right? Like I look at a lot of things that fall under brand or earned media, like comms team, product, PR, AR. Those are like really critical functions of a successful organization, not necessarily measured with the fine tooth like paid media or maybe how SEO used to be able to kind of look at attribution, but just as important. And they're still resourced and staffed and prioritized internally. So it's just how you change the narrative around it.
Yeah, makes sense. So, I mean, this has been great, Chris. How people should find you on LinkedIn via Christopher Kelly. Anywhere else people should find you, or how's the best way to contact you?
Yeah, I'm not as public, so I don't have like my own podcast or anything. I'd say hit me up on LinkedIn or just reach out. I have one of the most common names in existence, and so it's maybe hard to find me. So throw in like Christopher Kelly and SEO on there, and I'm pretty sure I show up.
Yeah, we'll put you in the show notes for sure. So when in doubt, find it. But you'll show up for that. Thanks, Chris.
Well, cool.
This was awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much. This is great. Anytime. Let's do it again. And go Warriors.
Yes, go Warriors.